The chapel was heavy with the scent of lilies, their sweetness a cruel contrast to the ache gnawing at my heart. I stood by Marcus's casket, my fingers grazing the polished wood, searching for a trace of the warmth he'd once carried. Friends from Asheville and his old carpentry crew shuffled by, their hands squeezing mine, their condolences blurring into the hum of grief. Through the haze, I saw my father, Raymond, standing apart, his face hard as granite, offering no comfort, no kind word. His curt nod felt like a transaction, not a gesture of love. As the pastor spoke of Marcus's generosity, his laughter, I clung to those memories, desperate to hold onto the man who built our home with his hands. But outside, in the biting mountain air, my father's bitter words about our land cut deeper than the cold, hinting at a storm I wasn't ready to face. As the mourners faded into the chilly Asheville evening, their voices dissolving into the mountain air, I stood alone, my father's bitter words about our land echoing in my mind. Marcus's funeral had left me raw, but it was the memory of our home, our sanctuary, that anchored me. I could still see Marcus at his drafting table, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind his ear, sketching late into the night. His hands, calloused from years of carpentry, moved with a quiet precision, adjusting lines, measuring twice, always asking how I moved through a room. "The counters should be lower," he'd said once, tapping the blueprint with a grin, "so you don't need a step stool for the top shelf." I'd laughed, teasing him for fussing over inches, but deep down I loved how he noticed the small things others overlooked. That was Marcus, thoughtful, deliberate, building not just a house but a life tailored to us. Our home wasn't just wood and nails on a patch of Carolina soil. It was his love made solid. Every choice carried meaning. We'd picked reclaimed Carolina pine beams from a weathered barn outside Hendersonville, their deep grain telling stories of decades past. Marcus believed wood with a history held strength, and I'd watched him hoist one onto his shoulder, his grin saying, "This is for us." The cypress floors, warm under bare feet, glowed in the morning light that poured through windows angled to catch the Blue Ridge sunrise. The porch, wide enough for rocking chairs and late-night talks, became our haven for dreaming. It wasn't about grandeur, it was about sanctuary, a place where we could breathe free from the weight of my father's shadow. Marcus poured his heart into every detail, especially for those we loved. For my Aunt Marta, whose wheelchair made visits a challenge, he designed wide doorways and a gentle ramp to the porch, ensuring she could come and go without feeling like a burden. He even added a small kitchenette at the back of the house, just for her, where she could brew her chamomile tea without asking for help. "Everyone deserves independence," he'd said, his voice soft but firm, and I saw Marta's eyes light up the first time she rolled through the door unaided. That was the kind of man Marcus was, building not just for us, but for everyone we held dear, crafting a space where love and freedom intertwined. To me, the house was more than walls. It was a declaration. My father, Raymond, had always loomed over my life, his control masquerading as care, his bitterness a constant undercurrent. He'd called Marcus a dreamer, sneering at the blueprints spread across our kitchen table, dismissing them as fairy tales. But with every nail Marcus hammered, every beam he set, he pushed back against that shadow. The house stood as proof we could build something beyond my father's reach, a life where his demands held no power. When Marcus locked the front door for the first time, he turned to me, his eyes steady, and whispered, "This is ours alone. No one can take it from you." Those words carried me now, as my father's voice lingered from the funeral, his claim on our land a fresh wound. I clung to the memory of Marcus's hands, shaping our home, our defiance, knowing this fight was far from over. The mountain air clung to my skin as Aunt Marta and I pulled into the driveway, the Blue Ridge sky fading into a bruised twilight. The weight of Marcus's funeral pressed against my chest, each step toward the house heavier than the last. I longed for the quiet of our home, the kind that wraps around you like a quilt, holding your sorrow close. But as I stepped out of the car, a faint glow spilled through the living room curtains, stopping me cold. Marta's eyes narrowed as she wheeled closer on the gravel. "Did you leave a light on?" she asked, her voice tight. I shook my head. I'd checked every switch before the service. My pulse quickened as I pushed the front door open, the air inside thick with the sharp scent of my father's cologne. There he was, Raymond, sprawled in Marcus's chair like he owned the place, one leg crossed, his suitcase propped against the wall. The television hummed with a half-static sports broadcast, as if he'd lived there for years. "You're late," he said, his lips curling into a smirk that carried the same cold edge I'd known all my life. "I've already moved your things to a little place out in the country. This house is mine now." The words hit like a slap, stealing my breath. Marta gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But I stood frozen, his audacity sinking in. He wasn't just grieving my husband's death. He was staking a claim on the one thing Marcus and I had built to escape him. My father's eyes gleamed with a mix of entitlement and desperation, as if he'd waited for this moment to seize what he thought I couldn't keep. But something inside me stirred, a quiet strength Marcus had left behind. Without meaning to, I laughed, a low, steady sound that unsettled him. His eyes narrowed, sensing I knew something he didn't. And I did. Marcus had made sure of it. I crossed the room, my fingers brushing the Carolina pine beam Marcus had set with such care. "This house," I said softly, "will never belong to you." My father stiffened, his jaw tight, but I turned away before his words could cut. The fight wasn't over. Marta went to bed, her face heavy with worry, but I stayed up, the silence of the house broken only by the creak of floorboards. My father hadn't left. His suitcase sat half open in the living room, shirts spilling onto the cypress floor, a declaration of his intent to stay. I wanted to avoid him, to cradle my grief in peace, but Raymond never let silence linger. "You should thank me," he began, his voice deceptively calm, the tone he used when he thought himself reasonable. "I'm stepping in to keep this place from going to waste. A woman alone can't handle a house like this. You'll see." My body trembled, not from fear, but from an anger I could no longer swallow. "This is my home, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "Marcus and I built it together." He scoffed, leaning back in Marcus's chair. "Your home? Don't make me laugh. This land's been Callaway property for generations. My grandfather worked this soil. It's mine, and you only have it because I allow it." His words echoed my childhood. Every curfew, every restriction, every reminder that my life was his to control. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Marcus had freed me the day he pressed the deed into my hands, his foresight a shield against this very moment. "You're lying," I said, my voice low but firm. "Marcus bought this land outright from Samuel Littleton. The deed's in my name. You know it, even if you won't admit it." His jaw twitched, a flicker of unease crossing his face, but he pressed on, his voice rising. "You wouldn't have any of this without me. I fed you, clothed you, kept you alive after your mother died. You owe me." I stepped closer, my heart pounding, but my words clear. "What I owe you is the truth. This home was built on Marcus's vision, not your debts. It'll never carry your name." The room fell still. His face flushed, veins bulging as he gripped the arm of Marcus's chair. I saw the man who'd raised me, not with love, but with rules, not with warmth, but with control. My mother's death when I was 12 had left me lost, and he'd filled that void with structure, not softness. I'd mistaken it for strength once, but now I saw it for what it was, a need to dominate disguised as care. Every choice I made, school trips, college, my job as a hospice administrator, he questioned, belittled, controlled. When I started earning a steady paycheck, he eyed it with envy, as if my stability was stolen from him. His failed auto parts franchise, a gamble that bled his savings dry, only deepened his bitterness. Marcus, with his dreams and blueprints, had been a threat, a man who built something my father never could. Raymond had called Marcus a dreamer, sneering at the sketches spread across our kitchen table. Fairy tales, he'd muttered, as if love and hard work couldn't hold a house together. But Marcus proved him wrong with every beam, every nail, building a life that stood firm against my father's shadow. Now, as Raymond sat in our home, claiming it as his birthright, I saw the same man who'd tried to chain me to his failures. His claim on the Callaway land was a lie, a story he'd spun to justify his greed. But Marcus had known him better than I did. He'd seen this coming, and he'd protected me. Raymond shoved himself up, snatching his suitcase. "We'll see about that," he spat, his voice thick with venom. "You think you're clever, but I'll prove you wrong." The door slammed behind him, the echo rattling through the beams Marcus had chosen with care. I stood in the silence, my heart racing, knowing he wouldn't let this go. His defeat tonight was only the beginning. He'd come back, angrier, more determined to take what wasn't his. But as I traced my fingers along the beam, I felt Marcus's presence, steady and unshakable. He'd built this house to last, not just in wood and stone, but in the truth he'd secured for me. My father's threats couldn't touch that. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt the strength to face it, rooted in the home Marcus had left me and the love that still held it together. The summons arrived 2 weeks after my father's furious exit, a crisp envelope bearing the weight of his resentment. Raymond had filed a legal claim, asserting the land beneath our house was Callaway property, passed down through generations and, in his mind, wrongfully taken by Marcus. For a moment, as I held the paper, my chest tightened, the old fear of his control creeping in. But then I heard Marcus's voice, steady as the Blue Ridge itself, from a memory years before. "It's airtight, Eloan." His words anchored me as I prepared to face my father in an Asheville courtroom, a place where his bluster would meet the cold clarity of truth. I wasn't alone. Clara Jensen, my attorney, sat beside me, her calm presence a steadying force. Across the room, Raymond stood tall, shoulders squared, lips pressed thin, as if he were a man robbed of his birthright. But I knew the truth, and so did the documents Marcus had so carefully prepared. Clara opened her folder, sliding papers across the judge's bench with a quiet confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and measured. "The lot in question was purchased by Marcus Price from Samuel Littleton, a private seller, 15 years ago. The deed is clear. No Callaway ownership has ever been recorded." My father's jaw twitched as the judge reviewed the documents, his eyes narrowing with each nod of the gavel's keeper. Raymond tried to interrupt, spinning a tale of family legacy, claiming Marcus had only used his name to hold the land for the Callaways. But Clara was ready. She produced the trust papers, heavy with stamps and signatures, a fortress of legal foresight Marcus had built. They confirmed the property was mine alone, shielded from any outside claim. The room seemed to hold its breath as the judge's gaze settled on my father, his silence louder than any verdict. When the gavel fell, dismissing Raymond's claim, the color drained from his face. His hands curled into fists, but for the first time, I saw his confidence crack, his entitlement exposed as hollow. He brushed past me without a word as we left the courtroom, his silence a roar of defeat. Marcus had protected me, not just with love, but with a plan so meticulous it stood firm against my father's greed. Years ago, on an ordinary Saturday, Raymond had stood in our half-finished kitchen, scoffing at Marcus's blueprints, calling them a waste of time. No house built on sentiment lasts, he'd sneered, predicting I'd come crawling back when it all fell apart. Marcus hadn't argued, but I'd seen the quiet calculation in his eyes, the same look he wore when measuring lumber for a perfect cut. That night, he took my hand and said, "We need to see someone, not because I doubt us, but because I know him." Within a week, we were in a lawyer's office, the air thick with the scent of paper and ink. Marcus asked precise questions about deeds, trusts, and inheritance, never mentioning my father by name, but building a shield against a shadow. The lawyer explained the process. The deed would be in my name alone, a living trust securing the property against any claim. At the time, I thought Marcus was being overly cautious, but he only smiled, saying, "It's not caution alone. It's love." Now, in the aftermath of the courtroom victory, I felt the weight of his foresight. He hadn't just given me a home. He'd given me a fortress crafted from trust and paperwork as much as pine beams and cypress floors. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sorrow, but from a fierce gratitude for the man who'd seen this battle coming long before I did. Asheville wasn't a big city, and news of my father's failed claims spread like wildfire through church pews, barbershops, and diner counters. The community, once polite in his presence, began to see Raymond for what he was. Whispers followed him, stories of unpaid bills from a mechanic he'd stiffed years ago, memories of poker games that ended with slammed doors and debts left unsettled. His failed auto parts franchise resurfaced in conversations, how he'd convinced friends to invest only to leave them empty-handed. The image he'd guarded with bravado crumbled under the weight of truth. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid his glare, and men he'd played cards with at the VFW shook their heads, their murmurs a quiet judgment of his pride. For me, the gossip was just noise. The real victory wasn't in my father's public fall, but in the freedom I felt, standing in the house Marcus had built. I walked the cypress floors, my fingers tracing the grain of the Carolina pine beams, and felt his presence in every detail. The wide doorways for Marta, the windows catching the morning light, the porch where we dreamed together. Marcus had known my father's nature, his need to control, his refusal to let go of what he thought he deserved. 3 years before, when Raymond had dismissed our home as a dreamer's folly, Marcus had quietly prepared for this day. He'd sat with me in that lawyer's office, his hand steady on mine, ensuring that no one, not even my father, could take what we'd built. The courtroom win was more than a legal triumph. It was a breaking of chains. My father had raised me alone after my mother's death, but his care came with strings, rules instead of comfort, control instead of love. He'd belittled my choices from college to my career, always framing my successes as debts I owed him. But Marcus had seen me, not as a daughter to be managed, but as a woman capable of standing tall. His trust, his love, his foresight had given me the tools to face my father and win. As I stood in our home, the silence no longer felt heavy. It was a quiet born of strength, of knowing that Raymond's power over me had crumbled, exposed as nothing more than a man's desperation to reclaim what he'd never earned. Yet, even as I savored the victory, I knew my father wouldn't let it rest. His silence as he left the courthouse was too sharp, too charged with the promise of another fight. But for now, I held on to the truth Marcus had secured, a truth that stood as firm as the beams he'd carried on his shoulders, as unshakable as the love he'd poured into our home. I was free, not just from my father's claim, but from the shadow he'd cast over my life. And in that freedom, I felt Marcus beside me, his voice whispering through the walls, reminding me that this house, this life was mine to keep. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground, its walls stained with my father's intrusion. I couldn't stay. With a heavy heart, I listed it for sale, watching as young couples, drawn to the mountain views and Marcus's wide porches, walked through the rooms we'd built with love. Signing the papers felt like closing a chapter, but not an ending. With the proceeds and Marcus's life insurance, I bought a brick condo in downtown Asheville, overlooking the French Broad River. Its tall windows flooded the space with light, untouched by my father's shadow. From the old house, I salvaged 2 pine beams, crafting them into a bookshelf that now held photo albums, cookbooks, and Marta's favorite novels. It stood in my new living room, a piece of Marcus's strength, proof that I carried him forward. On my balcony, I planted a dogwood tree in a clay pot, its fragile blooms promising renewal. This life was mine, unclaimed, unbroken. If this story of love and resilience moved you, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heartfelt tales from the heart of Asheville.